didn't mention this earlier, forgot to say anything, but we did have an addition to our church family yesterday. Curtis and Keisha Unger saw the arrival of their son Clay yesterday morning. He was supposed to be baby Jesus in this program in a minute, and that was the plan. And I think his grandma was a little upset that he kept delaying and delaying. That messed up the plans. But there's actually a picture of him. I don't suppose you can see it. There's a picture of him. Somebody's got him in the manger up here. I don't think that was deliberate, or I don't think it was an accident, but I don't know who put it there. But anyway, we congratulate them and are happy for this family and their new son named Clay. It's difficult to do fellowship right now, we all understand. These different events that have been canceled, the people who are sick, people who are quarantined, make it difficult. Yet that still needs to be our goal. I heard this story, and I may have told this already, I don't know. I heard this story about a guy who was condemned to death. He was a criminal murderer or something, and he was condemned to death by the electric chair. So they took him in, and they strapped him into the chair, and hooked up the wires to him, and they put the hood over his head. His priest is with him at that point, and so now the executioner goes out, and they're ready to do this thing, and the priest says to this person, he says, "Well, you know, this is the end of the road, and you know, I've prayed with you and given you the last rites. Is there anything else I can do for you?" And the guy said, "Oh yes, Father, would you just hold my hand?" That is fellowship. That would be fellowship. Just hold my hand. We are in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12. We come to today. I'll read some verses there, and then I'd like to come back and make comments on two different angles of this, and I want to be done by 20 till, so help me out here. We have this children's program, and I don't want to intrude on their space. Chapter 12 of Hebrews says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders." That's the boots. What I was trying to illustrate up here, the big heavy boots. They hinder me if I'm trying to run. And he says, get rid of them. Kick them off. And there are sins. There are attitudes. There are fears that become these heavy boots. And we're trying to run a race, and these things just render us quite ineffective. And Satan kind of dances around us at times and says, "Ha ha, you're not getting very far, and you're not going very fast." But he's never going to suggest to us what the Lord suggests to us, which is get rid of them. These things that obstruct and hinder. And it could be that what hinders you in your Christian race is different than what hinders me. Each of us may have a particular or different kind of sin that besets us, that entraps us, that weighs us down. So I don't need to worry about your sin. I don't need to correct you, and I don't need to say, well, you know, I think this is like a heavy boot you're wearing. I have my own, and you have your own, and we don't need to condemn each other. We need to focus on removing the weight, getting rid of the weight that would lighten us and buoy us up, that we are able to run. The theme of this chapter, the idea is of this idea of a race, of a long mark, what he calls a course marked out for us. You know, races have different configurations. You have the car races that are just laps around an oval or a circle. You have the kind like the Grand Prix that go through the city streets and wind around. You have marathons, some which are out through the countryside, up over the different terrain and come back. And some are more tightly controlled, or it could just be a flat, straight out stretch like a sprint or a 100-yard dash where there's just one flat surface and you just run as hard as you can and it's over very quickly. The kind of course that is marked out for us in our lives is different. This guy out in Texas, this son-in-law of Roger and Roger Reed's. I didn't know him. I think he was Central America. I think he was Central American in his origins. 35 years old, and his course, he's come to the finish line. The course marked out for him in his life apparently was very different than the course that I've had marked out for mine. We all have a different shape of terrain or a different type of a race, but it's a race. Not just a speed race, but an endurance race. And I'll come back to that. But that's the idea of this first statement that says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us. So that's why I use these words. Let us run. They're right from the scripture here. There are times where we don't feel like running. There are times where we're not healthy or capable of running. There are times where we don't want to. But this says, run anyway. Run when you're tired. Run when you're sick. Run when you're sad. Just keep running the race. Because this is, as I said, this is not a race about speed. I'll go on in a second, but let me show you a picture, if you can see this or not. He starts it out, this verse in chapter 1, by saying, therefore, since we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. Now, a witness, the idea of a witness can have different, can go different directions. A witness can mean that I am a witness of something, and so I see it. And so, for years, when I was a kid growing up, I'd read this verse and I'd think, somebody's watching me. My great-grandpa's up there watching me. There's a cloud of witnesses and they're watching me. I've come to believe that's not what it means at all. That it don't mean that they are witness, they're a witness of me, but rather those who have gone on this great cloud of what I'm going to call here luminaries are a witness to me. They are a witness. They are a great cloud of witness. Who are these people? Well, they're different for each of us. But here in chapter 12, verse 1, he's talking about, he's coming off of this whole big long list of people in chapter 11. We talked about this last Sunday. What does it mean to have faith, and how exciting and dynamic it is, not just to believe something, but to do something. And these people were ordinary people who did extraordinary things because of faith. They took faith and they tucked it right in underneath their arm, and they went out and they did something with it. And by faith it says they conquered kingdoms. By faith they shut the mouth of lions. By faith they received their dead back from the grave again. By faith they chose. They weren't going to associate with this group of people, but they're going to associate with this group of people. By faith they had babies. I mean, it's this amazing list of these amazing accomplishments that people who really were quite ordinary people, just like us, facing great challenges with great faith, saw great accomplishments happen in their life. And this writer says, in the next breath, chapter 12, verse 1, that's a whole lot of witnesses. Those are like luminaries glowing in the darkness. That's my term. Just my image to kind of convey what I mean. That it's not so much that they're a witness of us, as if somehow all of these people, these Barak and Deborah and Samson and all these people mentioned, or each of us have, grandparents, great-grandparents, neighbors, friends, people from when we were growing up that have long since gone on, and we think, oh, they've gone ahead of me, which they have. It doesn't mean that they're looking back through little windows and they're watching you. What it means is, like a luminary, their life is a witness. And there's a whole host of them. He says there's a great cloud of them. This just means there's lots of them. In chapter 11, he listed a great many in this list, but he says I could have gone on and on and on. It's like looking up at heavens and there's the clouds. There's no end to it. There's no end to the men and women who have lived remarkable, amazing lives and have accomplished amazing things through faith that are witnesses to you. What are they witnesses of? Well, they are witnesses to show you how, number one, to have faith. That's part of what it means. What I mean when I say faith has a face. Faith isn't just a concept or an idea that we say, well, I got to believe a certain formula. Faith is people. And there's a face. What he's saying is there's a face on it. I shouldn't say faith is people. There's a face that is put on faith by people. And those from your past and those from my past, and we could all sit here and tell stories that would hold each other just spellbound about the luminaries from our past. It could be our own parents, it could be a teacher, a Sunday school person, it could be a grandparent, it could be some person in your community who left a great impact on you, because when you looked at them, you realize, and even today, you realize this is how you run the race. This is how you have faith. They show us, they are a witness by giving an example. But here's the other thing, the other side of it. They're also witnesses to us by showing us that in reality we can have faith. I think of some of the people who I grew up with, who were the generation before me, who I looked at as my mentors and teachers. And I say today, and I look back now today as an adult, and I think of some of the hard times that I know they went through. This was the World War II generation. Some of them had vivid memories of the Depression, all the way back into the 20s, some of the difficult things that we know nothing about. I'm talking about economically, the difficulties. And I say to myself, if they can do it, I can do it. If they can have faith in their crisis, I can have faith in this crisis. So what this is saying is, they're a witness to us. They're not only an example to us, but they're an inspiration to us. They not only let us know how to have faith, they let us realize we can have faith. Because sometimes we get so discouraged or discomforted that we think, oh, no, there's just no success here. Remember the old hymn, and I can't give you the hymn book number. We don't even have it. The hymn book, so can't sing it. Faith of our fathers, living still, despite a dungeon, fire, or sword. Oh, how my heart beats high with joy whenever I hear that glorious word. And the song goes on to describe various aspects of the faith of the fathers. This is what he's talking about here. Where he says, if I could go back to this picture, there are folks, and he says there's like a whole cloud of them up here. And he's referring specifically to these people he's listed here. We don't know those people. We didn't know Samson, and we didn't know Moses, and so forth. But there are people we know, that we knew, that are like these lights in a bag, that they stand before us, and they stand unto us as luminaries to put a face on faith. Now, the next part is this idea that I already read about a race. The witnesses are not witnesses of us, they're witnesses to us. But he says because of this, since we have this motivation and this realization and this inspiration, because of that, he says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set in front of us or before us or marked out for us or whatever it is that is our generation and our individual challenge and calling to do. Each of us find a different race course. But he says here in verse 2 that regarding options, regarding hindrances, there's just one option. If something hinders you in your race, in your Christian walk, in your Christian running, if there's something that makes it continually frustration to you, where you feel like it's a continual defeat from you, you just keep falling for the same temptation or the same problem over and over, and you're not experiencing victory, and you feel like I'm never going to get to the finish line. You'll keep tripping. This weight keeps pulling me down. He's saying there's only one option. Get rid of it. That's what he says. Lay it aside. That's me kicking these boots off up here that it's talking about. There's really only one option. And the second part of it is, he says to run with perseverance the race marked out. So the perseverance side is that says there's really only one goal. That this is the only thing that pleases God. It's not that we start the race, but it's that we finish the race. And so he says, run it with perseverance. What is perseverance? I believe I recall the King James Version uses the word patience. Run with patience the race that is set before you. I look at them having even a little bit of difference. Patience means I don't have to have everything right now. Perseverance means I will get there. Even it's more than perseverance goes beyond patience. Perseverance is this die-hard, non-stop attitude that says there's only one option. I'm gonna finish the race. And we've all seen remarkable examples of that sometimes in athletics, sometimes in the Olympics or some particular marathon where some poor person, 2 hours after everybody else is done, and they've already taken down, the things around the race course, and here comes some poor guy or lady, and she's barely dragging, or maybe they've been injured or something. Here they come. They are not going to stop until they cross the finish line, and our heart just says, wow, we got to respect that. We have to admire that. And he says, well, why do you think the Lord is any different? He's not impressed by our finery. He's impressed if we cross the finish line. If we say, I started with faith and I will end with faith. I started as a disciple of Christ at whatever point in my life that I understood that this is what I need to do, and I will die a disciple of Jesus Christ. And nothing will move me away, and I will continue my progress and my course and my race with faith all the way till my final moment. There's only one goal for our mind. There's a course marked out for us, and so we have to say, look, I'll run till I'm not going to just run till I get tired, or I'm not just, which is the temptation, right? Or this is what I see a whole lot. I'm gonna run the race of Christ, and I'm going to run hard, and I'm going to run all the way until something distracts me. And as soon as I see a pretty lady walking her dog or something, I would probably just get distracted. Or as soon as I see some lights or something, I suddenly forget that I'm running in the midst of a race, and I just am drawn off the course, and I'm distracted. And that's not perseverance. He says, let us run have a kind of commitment that never lets up, that never gives up, that never quits, it's never distracted, no matter what. So faith has a face. It's the face of those who have have blessed us and inspired us in the past that we've looked at and observed in their environment, and we saw the joy, and we saw the stick-to-itiveness, and we saw the reality of it. And we saw the fact that the challenges and the tragedies of life didn't take it away. Didn't change it. We saw that. That's the face for us. But there's a race now for us. But it wasn't just for us. Guess what? Jesus had a race set before him too. And this verse is a powerful verse. Verse 3. For us to examine. Verse 2. When he says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured. There's your race. This didn't just happen in a moment. This was not just simply a decision that he made in his mind. There was something to do for Jesus. There was a race to run. There was a course to finish. And he had to set his mind to do it. And he had to go through the agony of both, not just the physical, of course, but the spiritual and the emotional and all these other things. And it says there in this verse, the marathon was Calvary, but it wasn't easy. And Jesus had to set aside some stuff. First of all, he had to set aside his own personal pride, because it says this was shameful to him. This was embarrassing to him. And he said, and he just kicked that off and said, I'm not going to let that stop me from doing what God sent me here to do. Excuse me. And I'm going to take this thing all the way through until it says he can sit down at the right hand of the throne of God. So if you think of the purpose for which Jesus was born, beyond the manger is the cross, just like this little setup up here, that this was a marathon that Jesus had to run. And he uses this for us as an example to, here's a different translation of this same verse. It says, we do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, on whom our faith depends from start to finish. He was willing to die a death of shame on the cross because of the joy that he knew. So this is the reward. This is the trophy that follows the race. And now he is seated in the highest honor beside God's throne. Think about him. Let me go back. Look at the last word. Consider him. So again, here's an inspiration that he's talking about. That we look at those others in the past, but we also have Jesus to look at. We say Jesus did it. Yes, Jesus came and arrived as the Son of God to this world, but he was fully human at the same time. He could have failed, but he didn't. And so I'm just putting this in analogy of ways that, or terms that fit in with this idea of the race of Jesus. Excuse me. What qualifies Jesus to be my mentor? What qualifies Jesus to be the person that inspires me for my own race to glory and my race to heaven was because Jesus successfully ran an impossible course. I don't think there's anybody in the history of all humanity, spiritually speaking now, I'm talking about, who possibly did what Jesus did. He ran over, if I can just relate the spiritual thing of bearing the burden of our sins to the physical world. Jesus ran over the mountains and the rocks and the oceans and the glaciers. If you'll picture a person, a marathon runner, who's just running and continues on his course across the oceans and the glaciers and through the forests and the swamps and through fog and wind and ice and darkness and blinding heat. He ran through the urban jungles and dodged the traffic. He ran through war zones and across the salt flats. And he ran over fields and rivers. He ran through the mud and the brush. He ran up the side of Mount Everest. He ran across the equator. He crossed the continental divide. He ran the entire length of the Great Wall of China and across the no man's land at the 39th parallel. He ran through the length of Death Valley
and he kept running. I'm just saying, if you could think of how could any runner possibly go through all those difficulties and just continue to run through every danger and every obstacle. This was Jesus. That's why he's qualified. He ran an impossible course under embarrassing conditions to him. It says he despised it. He hated it. He hated people making fun of him. He hated to have to lower himself to the accusations of the priests and the smirks of Herod and the questions of Pilate. He hated all that. It was shameful to him. But here's the reward. Here's the trophy, that he got to sit down beside God's throne. And he's called here, if you can think of Jesus holding a trophy, the engraving on it at the bottom is this. It's a very unique word in the Greek. And some translations might call it the pioneer. Some translations may call it the perfecter. The one says, well, he's the essence of our faith, or he's the example of our faith from the beginning to the end. It's just a unique word. That means he's the first one to ever do it, but he's also the one to show that it can be done. And maybe that's kind of an idea of, or maybe that's a bit of what a pioneer does. A pioneer blazes a new trail, but then there's all these other people come after the pioneer. And that's what Jesus was. He's the pioneer of our faith. Or the perfecter. So if you can think of the trophy maybe as having a label like that, he's simply saying, look, when you get discouraged, when you wonder why and how these things could happen in a world that we live in, if you wonder why it just seemed like that you didn't have all your dreams come true, and you're tempted to just give up, and you're tempted to say, I don't know if I believe any of this, think about Jesus, is what he's saying. And what he endured when he took on our sin, and how many times he must have thought to himself, I don't want to fool with these human people. I don't feel, I don't know if I wanted to go through this for them, to bear the weight of being separated from God because of their sins. I didn't do this. I didn't cause this. But Jesus did. And I'm saying here, the writer's saying, if you think about him in your own race, you'll get a burst of oxygen, and you'll get a burst of adrenaline. Now, one more item here, and one more facet of this. And he talks about what I read earlier in this service from Stephen Mansfield, this statement about hardship being a discipline. And it ties in with the theme of the race. So I want to read there. In your struggle against sin, let me just back up a second. In your struggle against sin, have you yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood? Or you have not resisted yet so far? I mean, you might have put up with a few smart remarks from people, but he says you still have your head on your shoulders. Nobody has yet put you in prison or shed your blood because of your faith, even though you might have had some difficulties as a Christian and your witness was laughed at or whatever. He says you have not yet shed your blood. The fact that you're still alive says that you haven't become a martyr. So you have forgotten the word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. My son, this is from the Old Testament. Do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you. Because the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone that he accepts as a son. Endure hardship as a discipline. As discipline. God is treating you as sons. And he goes on there. Let me skip to verse 11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. However, later on, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. So, I want to touch just briefly on this idea of discipline and the statement that hardship is discipline. It is very hard, at least for me personally, to detach the term discipline away from punishment. I'm not an athlete. I mean, I always enjoyed playing sports, but I'm not a trained athlete. I'm not a professional athlete. So I certainly don't have the kind of discipline that an athlete would have of doing their workout every single day, and disciplining their body in a way that would be beyond what I have ever really dealt with. And so it's a little bit hard for me, I think, to convey the idea of discipline as being something that's a benefit rather than something that's a punishment. And he actually even mentions the word punishment here, but then turns around and describes hardship in a way that lets you realize he's not talking about punishment. He's talking about a good side, a blessing, a benefit that comes from hardship. And therefore, because it prepares us, because hardship makes us strong and tough and prepares us, therefore it becomes discipline. So my question here is, when you have hard times, whether it's the virus that's hit, changed all of your plans and changed a lot of things for you, or whether your car broke down. I called a family just this week from our church. I called them, and as soon as she picked up the phone, she said, "Oh, David, we just walked in the door. We were in an accident, and our car was totaled, and we just got home from that." And you could just sense how she was trying to make sense out of the fact that they were in an accident. And some guy coming toward them slipped on a wet road and slammed into their side. John and Linda, you two have been through that. This wasn't a head-on. Apparently it was in the rear of the vehicle. And no one was hurt. No one was hurt. So they're very thankful. But what I'm saying is, when we have some crazy, difficult thing that happens to us or comes our way or enters our world, what is our attitude? Do we just get offended that God would not give me a perfect world? Sometimes I think the reason our government has to intrude in our own lives so much is they're trying to create a perfect world. And so they tell us, you have to do this, and you have to do that, you have to do that. It's never going to be a perfect world. And if I get offended by the presence of something that is giving me a hard time, then it must seem that I'm almost expecting a perfect world. And he's saying, no, listen, don't be offended by the trial or the difficulty, the persecution or the tragedy. Don't be offended by it. Rather, say to yourself, what can it bring to me as a possibility? How can I build and grow and become stronger? Hardship is God's discipline, he says. Endure hardship as discipline. And I'm simply saying, I believe he's saying here, not in a way of punishment, but rather in a way of building you up stronger. Discipline cuts these two different ways. It is not meant for our pleasure or our persecution, either one, but rather for making us tough. It's that kind of discipline. There you go. Some of you can relate to that. Sherry, you can relate to that, I assume. Making people miserable. That's what Sherry does all day long. She brings them pain. She inflicts pain upon them. And sometimes they don't like it. And I've been there on this side of the thing, and I don't like it. And some of you have too. Gets old. We want to just throw them things on the ground and say, this is hard. This is hardship. I don't want to keep doing this. And he says here, endure it. It's discipline. Endure hardship as discipline, because it's not meant for pleasure or persecution. It's meant to make you tough. So, to close my thoughts here, the point of this is that the race of faith is not about how fast you go. This is a different kind of race. Most races are about speed. But this is not about speed. The race that we are to run with endurance. It is the race of character. It is the race of our calling. It is the race of our identity. It is the race of true life. Jesus said this. The thief wants to kill and steal and destroy, but I want to give you abundant life. And if you get on the track and you run, I can give that to you. It's waiting for you. It's not about how fast you go or how fancy your uniform is, but it's about the finishing. That's what he's saying. We run it with perseverance. And I just want to say this to close. Sometimes I talk with folks who seem to feel like, or say, or express the fact that they feel like they're not qualified. They've failed in the past. They've messed up. They've sinned some horrible kinds of sin. Or they're living with consequences of sin. I've talked to people in jail who say, who never even going to get out of jail. And they say, well, I can never really run the race of Christ because I've already disqualified myself. And I want you to understand and hear this, that God can reverse that. He can heal and change and fit you for it. None of us are qualified on our own. None of us at all whatsoever. And it is only through Christ and because of Christ and in partnership with Christ that any of us are qualified to run the race. But we all can be. He can forgive your sin no matter what it is and put you on the race track for heaven. Would you stand with me for a closing moment of prayer? Heavenly Father, as we stand right now, we're just making a significant, we are signifying the fact, even in standing to our seat, that we choose to run the race of the Christian faith. And we're glad for those that we can learn from our past, that we can be inspired from in our past. Because surely many of them have been great models and great examples to us of running with perseverance the race. Not knocked off course by every fad or any tragedy or anything like that. And so we want to run. We want to run faithfully. We want to run all the way to the finish line. We stand in your presence, asking that you would infuse us with oxygen and adrenaline, and with energy and with power, with wisdom, with the presence of your Holy Spirit. That we can be someday these luminaries that others look at, that our children and their children look and say, well, they lived back there when they had that virus, and it was a very frightening time for them, a very dark time, a time when they were very divided in how they even looked at it and divided in their families. But I remember their faith shining above all of it and shining through all of it. I remember how it never kept them away or distracted them from their worship and their fellowship and their love. We want to be like that. And we believe that we can. And we thank you today for reminding us and for refining us for our own race. Dismiss us from this time of worship to run this race like the author of our faith has already done. I pray for the children as they set up for Sunday school and prepare, that you would bless their thoughts and inspire each of us through what they have to give as well. In Jesus' holy name we do pray. And all God's people said together.